Yes, sir, we are good.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this seventh session in the series of Coffee with the Bar. And today we have Justice M. Sundar to talk to us regarding an overview of arbitration law. Justice Sundar was a practicing lawyer here, was called to the bar a few years ago. Even as a lawyer, he belonged to the old school. He was a traditionalist, and he's followed it even after elevation. People who've gone to lawyers, especially young lawyers who've gone to his court, would vouch for the fact that he's a traditionalist in respect of preparation, presentation, and to a large extent propriety. Though he enjoys a good laugh, it is not at the cost of propriety or taking a hit at the decorum of the court. He expects the lawyers, especially juniors, to follow the traditions of this wonderful place that we call home, the Madras High Court. He has agreed to this session after I explained to him that it was basically for the benefit of young lawyers and juniors. So therefore, this session would basically be in respect of the basic principles, the first principles, the fundamentals of the law relating to arbitration, which would be for young lawyers, A, who are seeking to establish work in this particular or their footing in this particular field, or for young lawyers who are seeking to better their practice in this particular field of law. We only request one thing from all those who are watching, no interruptions during the session. And in this particular session, it would be questions directed only to the host or to me. And the questions would be routed only through us. And as specified, the question could be taken or it could be avoided. Thank you very much. And not many people know that Justice M. Sundar has not become a good speaker after he's become a lawyer or a judge. Not many people know that he was a fierce debater during his college days. As they say in debating circles, Justice Sundar, your time starts now.
Thank you, Mr. Sriram. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. A broad overview of arbitration is the topic. I am going to be very topical, which means I will be on first principles. I am able to see some names here who may be well established. So those of the participants who are well established and who have long standing may ignore the first principles, because the request was to go on first principles and give an overview to youngsters who are aspiring to make foray into this branch of law and this area. So therefore, this is intended for youngsters who intend to make a foray, are just in the process of making a foray. With this preface, I just try to straight away get into the topic. A broad overview of arbitration. The question is, what is arbitration? This is one question which on the face of it appears to be very simple. But when you get down to find out from the Arbitration Act, which is in vogue, you will realize it is a conundrum of sorts. The reason is arbitration is defined in 2(1)(a) of the Arbitration Act. If we can have Arbitration Act 2(1)(a) on the screen for a moment. 2(1)(a). All right, I'll just read it. It's a very short section. We don't need it in the screen. Arbitration Act. 2 is definitions. And if you see 2.1a says, in this part, that is part 1, domestic arbitrations, in this part, unless the context otherwise requires, A, arbitration means any arbitration, whether or not administered by permanent arbitral institution. That's all. Therefore, you may not, it's not descriptive, it is not explanatory. Therefore, the definition, from the definition, it may be difficult for a youngster to make out what is arbitration. And the arbitration is by an arbitral tribunal. While on arbitration, let's just see what is an arbitral tribunal. That is 2.1d. This has to be read with another section. I will go into it a little later. 2.1d is arbitral tribunal means a sole arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators. That's all. So now let's come back to what is arbitration. Arbitration, I attempt to explain to the young minds what is arbitration. Arbitration is an alternate dispute resolution mechanism, meaning when two contracting parties enter into a contract, any contract for that matter, they have two options before them with regard to dispute resolution. A, the conventional court, going to the civil court if the contract runs into rough weather. B, they can create their own private tribunal and say, disputes, if any, between us arising out of this contract will be decided by this private tribunal. This private tribunal is arbitral tribunal within the meaning of 2.1d. Therefore, whether two contracting parties choose to opt for arbitration and therefore have this Arbitration Act applied to their contract or not is purely voluntary. Number two, more importantly, only if they opt for arbitration, the Arbitration Act comes into play. Otherwise, the Arbitration Act does not come into play. For a contradistinguishing illustration, I would say if there is a simple agreement to sell, A agrees to sell his immovable property to B, and A and B enter into an agreement to sell. The Transfer of Property Act, the Contract Act, Specific Relief Act, Registration Act, Stamp Act, all these statutes perforce get attracted. There is no option. Arbitration Act is an option. That is only if the parties choose to have disputes, if any, to be resolved by a private tribunal. This much about what is arbitration. Optional, it is a creature of contract. It is not a creature of a statute. You have the Railway Claims Tribunal, you have the Customs Tribunal, you have the Competition Appellate Tribunal, name it, and there are any number of tribunals. All those tribunals are statutory tribunals which are created by the statute, but not the arbitral tribunal. Arbitral tribunal is simply a private tribunal which is a creature of the contract between two parties. They may either make it or not make it. Now, let us take it that two parties, a young lawyer, a young mind, is called upon to advise clients as to whether to go in for arbitration or not. A contracting party comes to a lawyer, asks for advice, and when it comes to dispute resolution clause, the advice which the young mind is asked to give is whether to opt for arbitration or for any conventional, the conventional court. It depends from case to case. it depends on the specifications, it depends on the requirements of the parties. But for a lawyer to give advice regarding whether to have arbitration clause as the dispute resolution mechanism or not, he or she should necessarily know 7 aspects. This is my considered, this is what I am able to make out. He or she should have a fair idea about 7 basic principles regarding arbitration. Those 7 basic principles, in my understanding, are like this. 1, I'll give the enumeration and then take you through one by one very quickly, spending about half a minute in each. Very simple basic principles. 1, you should know what are the kinds of disputes which are arbitrable. All disputes are not arbitrable. Only some disputes are, not one, some disputes are not arbitrable. So at the outset, you should know what are the disputes which are not arbitrable, so that you don't end up suggesting arbitration as an ADR or an alternate dispute mechanism in a contract where the subject matter or the dispute which is likely to arise from this contract is not arbitrable. 1. Number 2, who can be an arbitrator? Is there any qualification? Who can act as an arbitrator? I'll come to that. 3, when you advise, after taking into account all other aspects, to have an arbitration clause, should it be a clause or a covenant in that contract itself, or should it be a separate agreement? This is aspect number 3. Aspect number 4 is, the moment you have an arbitration in a contract, should all the disputes arising out of contract go only before the arbitral tribunal, or can you restrict some and say, if ABC disputes arise, they will go before the arbitral tribunal. If it is EFGH, we will go to the court. Can you do that? Is it severable? Can you bifurcate and do that? This is the 4th aspect one needs to know. The 5th aspect is more in the nature of a caveat. We are now concerned only with part 1, domestic arbitrations, today in this webinar. Therefore, please have a look at section 2(1)(f) and make sure that the arbitration or the contract which you are dealing with is effectively a domestic arbitration and not an international arbitration, international commercial arbitration. 2(1)(f). International commercial arbitration means arbitration. One moment. Let me just, it's there on the screen for all of you. International commercial arbitration means an arbitration relating to disputes arising out of legal relationships, where contractual or not, considered as commercial under the law in force in India, and where at least one of the parties is 1, an individual who is a national of or habitually resident in any country other than India, or 2, a body corporate which is incorporated in any country other than India, or 3, an association or body of individuals whose central management and control is exercised in any country other than India, or 4, the government of a foreign country. Just make sure that you don't fall under 2(1)(f), so that it becomes a domestic arbitration. Then 6, while making the arbitration agreement, either by way of a clause or a separate agreement, you can advise the parties to decide on venue and language. Venue and language. It is always better you have an express clarity on this with specificity. And the last one is, how many arbitrators? 1, 2, 3, we don't know. Is there any limitation, any cap on the number of arbitrators, or is there some other aspect you have to bear in mind while advising about the number of arbitrators? These are the 7 basic aspects a lawyer should know, a young lawyer should know before advising regarding arbitration and as to whether to go in for arbitration or not. First one is arbitrable. Whether it is arbitrable. Where do you look for it? How do you find out whether the subject matter of the contract, if disputes arise, would be arbitrable or not? I will just straight away give you the leading case laws on this. I will give you the enumeration. Then whenever you want, you can look up these case laws. The leading case law is Booz Allen, 2011, 5 SCC 532. Date of Booz Allen is 15/04/2011. The next case is 2016 Vimal Kishore case. 2016 8 SCC 788 Vimal Kishore case. The third one is Ayyasami's case. 2016 10 SCC page 386. Vimal Kishore case is dated 17/08/2016. Ayyasami is dated 4/10/2016. Then two other cases which go together, Himangini and Vidyadrolia. Himangini is 2017, 10 SCC 706. Vidyadrolia is 2019, SEC online 358. Himangini and Vidyadrolia go together. In between, I wrote something for the division bench, and that is the lifestyle reported in 2017 5 Law Weekly, page 500. The equivalent is 2017 8 MLJ 385. Just make a note of these case laws. Whenever you have a doubt as to whether it is a particular subject matter is arbitrable or not, have a look at it. I will quickly run through the enumeration. The enumeration is like this, as in Booz Allen. 1. Disputes relating to rights and liabilities which give rise to or arise out of criminal offences. 2. Matrimonial disputes relating to divorce, judicial separation, restitution of conjugal rights, child custody. 3. Guardianship matters. 4. Insolvency and winding up matters. 5. Testamentary matters, grant of probate, letters of administration, and succession certificate. 6. Eviction or tenancy matters governed by special statutes where the tenant enjoys statutory protection against eviction and only the specified courts are conferred jurisdiction to grant eviction or decide the disputes. These are the 6 categories of cases held to be not arbitrable by Booz Allen. Now, Vimal Kishore and Ayyasami effectively added a 7th category. The 7th category is trust deed. You cannot have an arbitration clause in a trust deed. Let's not go into why it is so, then that becomes a separate lecture by itself. So I'm just so that I don't want to digress. And then, most importantly, Himangini and Vidyadrolia, I said go together. The reason is this, that is relatable to the 6th category in Booz Allen, namely eviction matters. Himangini and Vidyadrolia effectively deal with whether there can be an arbitration clause in a lease deed. Simple. In a lease deed, whether there can be an arbitration. Now, there were a line of authorities which said, if the dispute between the lessor and lessee does not pertain to recovery of possession of the demised property, and if it pertains only to recovery of arrears of rent or quantum of rent and issues akin to that, or in other words, issues other than recovery of possession of the demised property, you can have an arbitration clause, was one school of thought. Ultimately, doubting the correctness of Hemangini, Supreme Court referred the matter to a larger bench in Vidyadrolia. Vidyadrolia, larger bench, I am informed, has heard out the matter and reserved orders on 4th of February 2020. The orders, to my understanding, are yet to be pronounced. I think we were thereafter the lockdown came in. So therefore, please bear this in mind whenever you are dealing with a lease deed. And when in doubt, look up these case laws. And quickly, one word on lifestyle, which I wrote. In lifestyle, the issue was regarding IPR matters. Whether IPR, meaning intellectual property rights matters, are arbitrable. What the view taken in lifestyle is, for example, if it is a patent infringement case, a complaint of infringement is arbitrable because it is an action personal, though derived from a right in rem. But if the validity of patent is challenged, it is not arbitrable. This is the principle laid down in lifestyle. To elaborate, I'll spend half a minute on this and come back to the mainstream. For instance, in IPR, you know, IPR is made up of 5 statutes: trademarks, copyright, designs, patents, and geographical indications, GI. Unlike trademark and copyright, in patent and designs, a defendant facing a complaint of infringement of patent or infringement of design can challenge the validity of the patent or the design. A defendant in a patent infringement suit can say, please see, this patent ought not to have been registered in favor of the plaintiff. This is available, and if it is done, it becomes it effectively becomes a counterclaim by itself, and all principles of counterclaim apply. It is in this scenario that as long as this defense is not taken, it may be arbitrable, whether there is an infringement. The moment validity of patent is put in issue, it becomes a right in rem, it is not arbitrable. This is about lifestyle. You don't have to really worry too much on this. Broadly, these case laws give you an idea. The 6 + 1, 7 categories give you an idea of what are not arbitrable. Bear that in mind before you enter into an arbitration clause. The next is, who can be an arbitrator? As of today, there is no qualification for an arbitrator. Anybody can act as an arbitrator. There is no doubt an 8th schedule which talks about qualifications for arbitrators that has not been notified. There is a 7th schedule to the Arbitration Act which talks about disqualification to arbitrators, like the arbitrator cannot be an attorney for one of the parties. There are about 7 or 8 categories. So as long as a person doesn't get disqualified under 7th schedule, the person can act as an arbitrator, and even this disqualification can be waived by the parties, 12(5). So therefore, effectively, there is no qualification as of today for anybody to act as an arbitrator. 3, whether a separate agreement is required. No. It can either be by way of a separate agreement or by way of a dispute resolution clause in that contract. One issue which many are confronted with is, what happens if that main contract is terminated? The law is well settled. Even if the main contract is terminated, the dispute resolution clause, namely the arbitration clause, will outlive the same and will survive. Therefore, you need not have any doubt in your mind that if you make the arbitration as a covenant in the contract, what will happen tomorrow? if the contract gets terminated. The law is well settled that being a dispute resolution clause, the dispute resolution clause will survive such termination. Then the fourth point is whether all disputes in that arising out of that contract straight away have to go to arbitration, or can you restrict it? You can restrict it. You can either say all disputes arising out of this contract, or you can say some disputes will go for arbitration, others will go to court. It is open to you to say that. Then 5 is 2(1)(f), which I have already told you. It is in the form of a caveat. 6 is venue and language. These are contained in sections 20 and 22. I'm not reading those sections to you. I don't want that on the screen. Suffice to say that it is better to mention the venue and language very clearly. And lastly, how many is the question. How many, please bear in mind 10 subsection 1. Here let us look at, now we already looked at 2(1)(d), 10 subsection 1. The parties are free to determine the number of arbitrators provided that such number shall not be an even number. Therefore, it can be 1, 3, 5, 7, so on and so forth. No cap. Make sure it is not an even number. That's all. Therefore, now these 7 basic principles, if you have clarity, then look at the contract, look at the parties, then it is open to you to agree on an arbitration clause. Then the parties agree and create an arbitral tribunal. As I said, it is a creature of the contract. Now, how do they do it? They can say, let us say that it is an agreement between A and B for supply of goods. A agrees to supply some goods to B over a period of time at a particular price in a particular manner. A simple sale of goods contract. Now here, the parties can say, if there is a dispute between us tomorrow, the dispute will be resolved by a sole arbitrator mutually agreed by the two of us. Or they can say, by 3 arbitrators, one to be appointed by A, another to be appointed by B, and the 2 arbitrators appointed by A and B sit together and choose a presiding arbitrator. This is a 3-member arbitral tribunal. Of course, there is no limit. Another way of doing it is, you can even name the arbitrator. You can say, retired judge, not necessarily retired judge, I'm just telling you, so-and-so will be an arbitrator, and he or she will be the sole arbitrator if there is a dispute tomorrow. So you have created the arbitral tribunal. All right. Now, once you create the arbitral tribunal, everybody hopes that there is a happy ending for the contract, but it does not happen always. It may run into rough weather. Let's assume it runs into rough weather. What do you do? What are the scenarios? Broadly, what are the... Before I take you through that, I will try and walk you through that. What happens when there is a dispute? I need to mention this, and I want the young members to bear in mind that the moment you have advised and the parties have agreed, it's a creature of the parties. A and B have agreed to go in for arbitration as dispute resolution clause. There are 4 principles, according to me, which are very, very important. The moment you opt for arbitration, 4 principles are very, very important. 1, party autonomy. 2, expeditious disposal. There is a timeline. 3, minimum judicial interference. This is very important. Minimum judicial interference. 4. Finality of the arbitral award. These are the 4 pillars on which the arbitration as an ADR mechanism stands. Number 1 is party autonomy, which I have already explained to you. It is a creature of the contract. You can either opt for it or you don't have to opt for it. And once you opt for it, you decide what will be the composition of the arbitral tribunal. That's party autonomy. You choose, unlike the court. You decide who is going to decide and resolve your disputes. That's party autonomy I have already mentioned about. It's a creature of the contract. 2 would be expeditious disposal. The moment you agree for arbitration and there is a dispute, the time limit is 1 year plus an additional 6 months. Under 29 capital A, I'm not reading it, an arbitration has to be completed within 1 year from the date on which they enter appearance. And now, as of today, it is the date of completion of pleadings. From the date of completion of pleadings. Earlier, it was from the date of entering reference. 29 capital A. This 1 year can be extended by another 6 months by consent of the 2 parties. So therefore, within 18 months maximum, you have an award. If you want further extension, you have to go to court. Otherwise, the mandate of the arbitral tribunal gets terminated. The mandate of the arbitral tribunal can be extended post 18 months only by approaching the court under 29 capital A subsection. So expeditious disposal. Besides this, there is also a fast track arbitration where you can agree to complete it in 6 months, where you say no oral hearings, oral hearing only if necessary, only based on written submissions. That is in 29. So this is expeditious disposal. It's time bound. 2. 3 is minimum judicial interference. This is very, very important. As I mentioned at the outset, choosing to go for arbitration as an alternate dispute resolution mechanism is an alternate to the court. Therefore, there will be minimum judicial interference from the court. The arbitral tribunal will decide almost all the issues, and the circumstances under which the court will step in are very, very limited. We'll just quickly run through that. So please bear that in mind, minimum judicial interference. And the last one is finality of the arbitral award. The parties have to be clear in their mind. They are choosing the arbitral tribunal. They are deciding who is going to decide and resolve the disputes. Ultimately, they should be clear in their mind that it is almost final, because the scope of interference in an award is very limited. There is no appeal. There is one section 34. Please bear in mind that is not an appeal. That is not a revision. That is not a review. I will tell you what it is. It's not an appeal. It is not a revision, not a review. So therefore, finality, it's a delicate balance between the sanctity of finality of an arbitral award and judicial review. Therefore, finality is the 4th principle. These 4 principles, the parties have to be very clear when they opt for arbitration. Now they have opted for arbitration. The contract is operating for some time, and it unfortunately runs into rough weather. The moment it runs into rough weather, let us imagine the simple scenario, because we are only taking an illustration. What I mentioned earlier, the parties have agreed that the arbitral tribunal will be constituted by a sole arbitrator who shall be mutually agreed upon by both the parties A and B. Let's take the simple example. So the moment the contract runs into rough weather, let's say A writes to B saying, I suggest X as the arbitrator. Please give your consent. B has 30 days to respond. B may give the consent, then the arbitral tribunal starts functioning. Then we'll see what happens. That's one way the arbitral tribunal starts functioning. The other way is B doesn't respond. What do? Then A can approach the court under section 11. 11 is described as the default power. The A can approach, in the instant illustration which we are dealing with, A can approach the court and say, under 11, and say, here is the arbitration agreement or the arbitration clause which serves as an agreement. We have agreed that a mutually agreed sole arbitrator will resolve the disputes. Disputes have erupted. These are the disputes. I have written to B suggesting the name of X and calling upon X to consent, but X has not B has not consented for 30 days. Please appoint an arbitrator. Then the court will hear 11 and appoint an arbitrator. When the court hears section 11, the powers are very, very limited. I will give the lead case laws on that. The court will only look at existence of an arbitration agreement. Please be very careful. The court will not even go into existence of a valid arbitration agreement. For instance, in section 8, the expression used is valid arbitration agreement. The court will not go into even valid arbitration agreement. The court will merely see whether there is an arbitration agreement, existence of the arbitration agreement. If there is an arbitration agreement, the court would appoint an arbitrator or arbitrators, as the case may be, and relegate all issues and questions to the arbitral tribunal. This is on account of subsection 6 capital A of section 11. Can we have that on the screen, please? Subsection 6 capital A of section 11. (6)(a). Subsection 6 capital A. Capital A, please. No, the small a. 6 capital A. You may have it in the footnote. You might have to go to 18. There it is. The Supreme Court, or as the case may be the High Court, while considering any application under subsection 4 or subsection 5 or subsection 6, notwithstanding any judgment, decree, or order of any court, confine to the examination of the existence of an arbitration agreement. Very limited. Now you will see, even in whatever they have put on screen, you will see that there is a proposal to delete 6A, but it has not been notified. It has not been deleted. It is there in the statute book as of today. It is there in the statute book as of today. Therefore, 6A is operating. You need not have any doubts on that. Now, the lead case laws on section 11. The latest case law is Northern Coalfields 2020 2 SCC 455. Date of the order is 27/11/2019. Prior to that was Mayawati Trading 2019 8 SCC 714. Even prior to that was Durofalgura, or otherwise Gangavaram Port Limited 2017 9 SCC 729. Sum and substances of these judgments in very simple terms is Section 11 is a default power, and while exercising this default power and appointing an arbitrator or arbitrators, the High Court would look at only the existence of an confine itself to existence of arbitration agreement. That is why I have written that section 11, I would look at it with the hood. And the hood is confining oneself to examining whether there is an arbitration agreement, not a valid arbitration agreement as used in section 8. The expression doesn't say valid arbitration agreement. One other aspect on section 11, there is one other possibility. Somebody might raise an issue that the arbitration agreement itself has not been executed in appropriate value stamp paper, or that it has not been registered, though it is compulsorily registrable under section 17. This aspect the court can look into. The lead case law on this is Garware. 2019, 9 is CC 209. Other than these two, the scope is confined to examining whether there is an arbitration agreement. Now, either A writes to B and B agrees on X, or B doesn't agree, doesn't respond for 30 days, A takes the 11 route, and in 11, an arbitral tribunal is appointed. The arbitral tribunal starts functioning. Then what happens? What is of importance is sections 19, 29A and 29B. I already mentioned about it. Let's see section 19 for a moment. Determination of rules of procedure. The arbitral tribunal shall not be bound by the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 or the Indian Evidence Act 1872, within parenthesis 1 of 1872. Subject to this part, the parties are free to agree on the procedure to be followed by the arbitral tribunal in conducting its proceedings. 3. Failing any agreement referred to in subsection 2, the arbitral tribunal may, subject to this part, conduct the proceedings in the manner it considers appropriate. 4. The power of the arbitral tribunal under subsection 3 includes the power to determine the admissibility, relevance, materiality, and weight of any evidence. So this is what the arbitral tribunal procedure is concerned. I think the section 19 is so clear that no elucidation is required. It's not bound by CPC, it's not bound by Evidence Act. The arbitral tribunal can evolve its own procedure. The parties can agree on a procedure. Therefore, it is very different from a court. Please bear this in mind. Thereafter, 29 capital A and 29 B, which I have already mentioned, time frame, 1 year plus 6 months, 18 months. Otherwise, you have to approach the court. The mandate of the arbitral tribunal snaps. Then 29B is 6 months fast track procedure. This much about the arbitral tribunal and its proceedings. Ultimately, the arbitral tribunal gives its verdict. This verdict is called an award. Award is also defined in 2(1)(c). Not necessary to look at it because it's only an inclusive definition. For the purpose of clarity, probably we can have it on screen. 2(1)(c). It's just an inclusive definition. Simple inclusive definition. 2(1)(c). Arbitral award includes an interim award. That's all. Don't have to worry about it. Arbitral award is a judgment. It is the verdict given by the arbitral tribunal. Pausing here for a moment, one should please make a note that the Arbitration Act, which is now in vogue, which is now operating, I'll give the details, is Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, which is Act 26 of 1996. I'll give you the dates. Prior to that, we had Arbitration Act 1940. Under the 1940 Act, this award rendered by an arbitral tribunal had to be filed in court. And then it had to be conferred the status of a decree by the court. Only then it becomes executable. That was the law under the 1940 Act. The major shift now under the 1996 Act is the award is per se executable as a decree. The moment this private tribunal passes an award, you can go to the court, launch execution proceedings. That is a major shift. So it is effectively a judgment. Now, one party or the other is bound to feel aggrieved by this. Please bear in mind, in the opening part of this webinar, as they call now, the term has come to stay as I understand. In this webinar, I said, finality of the arbitral awards. Parties choose who are going to decide their fate. The arbitral tribunal is a constitution of the parties. Party autonomy. Having chosen, thereafter, the parties should be willing to accept that this is final. Still, if there are certain shortcomings and somebody feels it has to be challenged, the recourse is under Section 34, which is neither an appeal, nor a review, nor a revision. Before I go to 34, we will have a quick look, because 34 is the final part of the webinar. 34, and before we go into 34, what is the scope of 34? What is the, once the verdict is rendered by the arbitral tribunal, how much of scope is available for a party to challenge it in a court? Before we look at that, there are two provisions which are relevant. We may have to look at it. They are sections 8 and 9. Now, as far as 8 is concerned, let us assume in the illustration which we are now considering, A and B agreeing to supply goods to B for a particular price for a particular period, whatever be the terms, certain specifications. There is an arbitration clause clearly saying if there is any dispute tomorrow, we will have it settled by X, a mutually agreed sole arbitrator. Ignoring this, B goes and files a suit. What will you do? Section 8 is the answer. A, who will be arrayed as a defendant in the suit, can go to court, file an application under Section 8 and say, please see, there is a valid arbitration agreement between their valid arbitration agreement in Section 8. Valid arbitration agreement between us, therefore, refer us to arbitration. This is one important aspect. The other provision, I don't want to read 8. Probably we'll just have a quick look at 8, because 8 says valid arbitration agreement, unlike 6A, section 6A of 11, which only says arbitration agreement. Let's look at 8. Power of parties. A judicial authority before which an action is brought in a matter which is the subject of an arbitration agreement shall, if a party to the arbitration agreement or any person claiming through under him so applies, not later than the date submitting his first statement of substance of the dispute on the then, notwithstanding any judgment, decree or order of the Supreme Court or any court, refer the parties to arbitration unless it finds that prima facie no valid arbitration agreement exists. Quickly, let's look at subsection 6A of 11 again. Just to contradistinguish, just look at 6A, please. Just look at 6A. 6A, you'll have to go to the footnote, Mr. Wilson. You have to go to the footnote. There we have. Yes. The Supreme Court, or as the case may be the High Court, while considering any application under subsection 4, you'll have to go up a little, please. Notwithstanding any judgment, decree or order of any court confined to the examination of the existence of an arbitration agreement. Doesn't say valid arbitration. Very crucial. In 11, even if the validity is challenged, the court will say, raise it before the tribunal under 16. Just for contradistinguishing, I just said the statute has consciously used valid arbitration agreement in one clause and said arbitration agreement in another. Just wanted to highlight that. This is this much about 8. The other provision is 9. Section 9 is for interim measures. Section 9, now in this scenario which we are examining, the contract runs into rough weather. A writes to B saying, I suggest X to be the arbitrator. Please give your consent. B has 30 days to respond. Before responding, B is continuing some activity unabated, which is obliterating value, some material which is subject matter of supply or some matter which is subject matter of the contract. What does A do? A can file an application under section 9 and ask for an interim protection saying, please see, I have an arbitration agreement. The arbitration has gone into rough weather. I have written to A, B, this is happening, and until the arbitral tribunal is constituted, I need some protection. Now, in my considered view, manifest intention to arbitrate is very important. This is when you approach the court before arbitration. I don't want to go much into it. Suffice to say that 9 is an interim measure which is available to parties before, during, after. Before, during, after arbitral proceedings. Before meaning you should be able to demonstrate manifest intention to arbitrate. Even if you demonstrate that, now by introducing subsection 2, it is valid only for 90 days, subject of course to the discretion of the court. And during, now if you see, all the powers which are available under 9 have been given to the arbitral tribunal under 17. And more importantly, the moment the arbitral tribunal is constituted, the court will not entertain an application under 9. This is under subsection 3. We will have a look at 2 and 3. Before that, I think as they get ready with subsection 9, subsections 2 and 3, I will tell you post-award, you file for EP, you launch an execution. The execution is yet to get underway. In the interregnum, if you want some protection, it's still open to you. That is why I said 9, before, during, and after. Now let us look at 9.2. 9.1 is an adumberation of the kind of interim orders that can be given by the court. All these interim orders can now be given by the arbitral tribunal under section 17. Section 17 has been expanded on and from 23/10/2015, and all these powers are available with the arbitral tribunal. Let's look at 2 now. Let's look at 2, please. Where before the commencement of the arbitral proceedings, the court passes an order for an interim measure of protection under subsection 1. The arbitral proceeding shall be commenced within a period of 90 days from the date of such order, or within such further time as the court may determine. Now please come to 3. Once the arbitral tribunal has been constituted, the court shall not entertain an application under subsection 1. Sorry, I lost, I'll read it from my book.
Sir, it's back.
Back? No, I got it once. Once the arbitral tribunal has been constituted, the court shall not entertain an application under subsection 1 unless the court finds that circumstances exist which may not render the remedy provided under section 17 efficacious. This not, according to me, should be before efficacious, not before render. The reason is very simple. Because in the process of writing something, the reason is very simple. Once an arbitral tribunal is constituted, the court will not entertain an application under 9. That's the first part of subsection 3. The second part, the second limb of subsection 3 is an exception to the first limb. The exception is, if 17 is not efficacious, it can still entertain under 9. For example, if the tribunal were to give some interim direction to a registering authority or a nationalized bank, the tribunal does not have the power to do that. Or if the tribunal were to give a direction to a third party, which is not party to the arbitration agreement, then 17 may not be efficacious. If 17 is not efficacious, then the court may entertain an application under 9, even though the arbitral tribunal has been constituted. Now let us read the second limb of subsection 3. First limb is very clear. Once the arbitral tribunal has been constituted, the court shall not entertain an application under subsection 1. Clear as daylight, at least to me. Clear as daylight. No difficulty about that. The second limb, unless, which is an exception, the second limb is an exception to the first limb, unless the court finds that circumstances exist which may not render the remedy provided under section 17 efficacious. Now put the not before efficacious and read it. Unless the court finds that circumstances exist which may render the remedy provided under section 17 not efficacious. So therefore, this not should not be before render, but should be before efficacious. So that is one aspect of the matter, but that is incidentally I just mentioned. We need not get into that. Then that makes it esoteric, and it makes it very invaluated, if I may say so, esoteric and invaluated. So I don't want to go into that. Let's be simple, uncoiled, straight, because we are on first principles. 2 is 90 days. Manifest intention to arbitrate. In my considered view, I've written something. Manifest intention to arbitrate is a jurisdictional fact, and a party approaching the court under 9 before arbitration should be able to demonstrate that he or she has manifest intention to arbitrate, which is at the discretion of the court. And during arbitration, once it is commenced, you should be able to show that 17 is not efficacious. Post arbitration, during arbitration, you should be able to show 17 is not efficacious. Post arbitration, you should say, here is an award. I have launched execution. In the interregnum, some activity is continuing unabated, which is obliterating the material which is subject matter of arbitration. or which is eroding the substratum of what is security for me. Therefore, please protect me. These are the various prayers which one may ask post. So before, during, after. This much about 9, and with 9 we also had a bird's eye view of 17. Now I think I've been on for 1 hour. Now I will make this 10 more minutes and complete on 34. All right, just 10 more minutes and I will complete on this, what happens to challenge to the award, because 34 can become a lecture by itself. We are now, I'm very topical, I'm getting very, very topical. Therefore, only a bird's eye view. Before I go to 34, I said I'll give you the act, I'll give you the statute which is on. Yes, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yes.
there's no question of any time limit. Anyway, we cannot go anywhere.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, but then I will wind up in 10 minutes.
Anytime.
Yes. Now what happens is, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, Act 26 of 1996, which is now operating, is dated 16/08/1996. Please make a note of these dates. And what I'm going to say now about this act and the amendments are very, very relevant when you apply this act. This act came into force on and with effect from 22/08/1996. The act is dated 16th August 1996, but came into force on and with effect from 22nd August 1996. It was operating for nearly a decade. Then came 2 major amendments. The first amendment is by way of Act 3 of 2016. This act originally came as an ordinance and then became an act. But for convenience, let's not go into all those nuances. We will simply say the first amendment, major amendment to this 1996 Act, is by way of amending Act, namely Act 3 of 2016. Act 3 of 2016 takes retrospective effect on and from 23/10/2015. It brought in large-scale amendments. For instance, this subsection 2 and 3 to section 9, scope of section 17 being expanded and all the powers under 9 being given to the arbitral tribunal. These are all some of the major changes which were brought in. Then a second major amending act came into force, partially. That is Act 33 of 2019. For convenience, we will refer to this Act 33 of 2019 as Second Amending Act. This Second Amending Act is dated 9/8/2019. Different books give different footnotes. Different books, different publications seem to have understood it differently. So therefore, please be very careful. Please be very careful when you look at this Second Amending Act. It is dated 9/8/2019. The Second Amending Act consists of 16 sections, 16 provisions. But the Second Amending Act in section 1, that's right, there we have it. Subsection 3 of section 1 is of great relevance. Subsection 3 of section 1. I don't find it there. 9th August, short title and commencement, then 2. This has to be 3. it shall come into force on and such date as the central government may by notification in the official gazette appoint. This is subsection 3 of section 1. I'm very sure about what I'm reading. Now, out of these 16 sections in the second amending act, 11 sections were notified on 30th August 2019. And that notification was by way of, there you have, SO 3154. Section 1, 4 to 9, both inclusive, 11 to 13 and 15. 11 have been notified. 5 have not been notified. Just by way for abundant clarity and specificity, I am saying, we looked at subsection 6 capital A. One of the amendments brought in by the second amending act is complete deletion of 6 capital A. That is why you found it in the footnote, but it has not been notified. Therefore, 6 capital A is still in the statute books. So whenever you are looking at the second amending act, please bear the subsection 3 of section 1 in mind, and please bear in mind that the amending act is dated 9th of August 2019, but only 11 out of the 16 sections of the amending act have been notified and have come into force and have become operational on and from 30th August 2019. Any doubt, look at that SO 31, whatever was on the screen. I hope you have made a note of it. SO 3154 capital E, dated 30th August 2019, which gives the sections which have been noted. Right. Now we come back. So this much about the act which is in force. The 1996 Act is in force. It underwent 2 major amendments, one on and from 23/10/2015, the other on and from 30th August 2019. That is the one that is operating now. We will come back to 34. The award has the sanctity of being final. As I mentioned, the party autonomy is there, party autonomy to choose the tribunal which decides and resolves the dispute. Therefore, the parties have chosen. They have to necessarily accept the award. In spite of it, if there is something, you come under 34. 34 is by way of an application. And there are 8 grounds on which an award can be challenged. It is grounds, but I have written that they are pigeonholes, because it is not an appeal, not a review, not a revision. Then what is it? What do you call it? It's not an appeal, it's not a revision, it is not a review. Then what do you call it? It is a challenge to award. That's all. And challenge to award within the contours and confines of section 34. When I say contours and confines of section 34, I'm talking about the 8 pigeonholes. The 8 pigeonholes are adumbrated in subsection 2 of section 34. Before that, what you have to bear in mind is any youngster who is intending to file a section 34, before you see section 32, see the 8 pigeonholes and see whether it fits into any one of these pigeonholes. It should fit snugly into one of these pigeonholes. If it does, you succeed. If it doesn't, you're out. So this is a delicate balance between finality of arbitral award and sanctity of judicial review. Be that as it may. Before that, subsection 3 deals with limitation. Let's look at 1 and 3 in that order. Subsection 1 and subsection 3. It's very, very important, because if you miss the limitation, even a day's delay cannot be condoned. Let's see 1, please. Let's see 1, please. 1 first. Subsection 1. Recourse to a court. It doesn't say appeal. recourse to a court against an arbitral award may be by an application for setting aside such an award in accordance with subsection 2 and subsection 3. Subsection 2 gives these 8 grounds. Subsection 3 talks about the limitation. Let's see the limitation and then come to the grounds. Let's see 3, please. 3. An application for setting aside may not be made after 3 months have elapsed. I think the one part of the screen I'm having I'll use the book because I'm sure the screen is visible to others, but 3. An application for setting aside may not be made after 3 months have elapsed from the date on which the party making that application had received the arbitral award, or if a request had been made under section 33 from the date on which that request had been disposed of by the arbitral tribunal. Proviso. Provided that if the court is satisfied that the applicant was prevented by sufficient cause from making the application within the said period, within the period of 3 months, it may entertain the application within a further period of 30 days, but not thereafter. But not thereafter. So this 3 months is available to you from the date on which the party has received the arbitral award, or if some correction has been sought. 33 is correction. Some number, some error, typographical error might have come in. One party may ask for correction, and if the correction is made, from the date on which the correction is made. Simple. So 3 months is the reckoning date, is either the date of receipt or the date on which the correction is made, if there is a correction. And if it exceeds 3 months, the court has power to condone only up to a maximum of 30 days and not thereafter. 31st day it will not condone. Even under the normal circumstances, when a special statute prescribes a cap, Section 5 of the Limitation Act has no application. The law is well settled on this. Here, added to it is the expression "but not thereafter." The Supreme Court has interpreted this expression "but not thereafter" and said even a day's delay cannot be condoned. The lead case law on this is Simplex. I'll give you the Simplex citation. 2019, 2 SCC, page 455. 2019, 2 SCC, 455. Therefore, this 3 months and 30 days. 3 months is not 90 days. Please bear that in mind. I don't want to enter into that because that's another area. 3 months and 30 days, not 120 days either. 3 months and 30 days is very, very sanctus. And the moment you cross this, you cannot have your 34 taken on file by the court. Simplex Infrastructure. I have also written several judgments on that, several orders on that. This is the position. Don't miss the bus. Be very careful. Examine this. Once you miss the bus, you can't have your 34 taken on file. Then we will have a quick look at 5 and 6 also. 5 is an application under this section shall be filed by a party only after issuing a prior notice to the other party, and such application shall be accompanied by an affidavit by the applicant endorsing compliance with the said requirement. This matter came up before the Supreme Court. The question as to whether the subsection 5 is directory or mandatory. Supreme Court said it is directory. It is not mandatory. The lead case law on this is Bhumi Vikas Bank. I will give you the citation. Bhumi Vikas Bank citation is 2018 9 SCC, page 472. Subsection 5, this notice, the party who intends to come to court under 34, putting the other party on notice and saying, please see, I intend filing a section 34, is now held to be merely directory and not mandatory. The reason is no consequence has been provided. The lead case is Salem Bar Association, all of us know. We need not dwell much into that. Now, subsection 6, an application under this section shall be disposed of expeditiously and in any event within a period of 1 year from the date on which the notice referred to in subsection 5 is served upon the other party. If no notice, I will take it as the date of presentation of the section 34 application, because subsection 5 has been held to be directory and not mandatory. Simple. Though this Bhumi Vikas Bank citation which I have given you is an authority for the proposition that subsection 5 is directory and not mandatory, Bhumi Vikas Bank also makes a reference to subsection 6 and says, every court dealing with 34 shall make an endeavor to adhere to this timeline under subsection 6. This you will find in paragraph 26 of Bhumi Vikas Bank. Therefore, you will now appreciate the tribunal has only 1 year, a further 6 months life extension by parties, 18 months, and any further extension only by court. Then once the tribunal gives its verdict, the award is challenged under 34, if at all it be so. And once it is under 34, that has to be disposed of within 1 year. At every stage, there is a timeline. This is relatable to one of the 4 pillars I mentioned, namely expeditious disposal, being the sublime philosophy and salutary principle underlying ADR mechanism. Now we have seen subsections 3, 4 and 5. Now we will come to this subsection 2. If you find the 8 grounds, 5 are in one basket under clause A, 2 are under another basket under clause B, and 1 is a standalone being 2 capital A, namely patent illegality. So 5 plus 2 plus 1, 8. 5 under 34 to A, 2 under 34 to B, and 1 being 34 to capital A. 5 plus 3, 2 plus 1, 8 grounds. Now the difference between the 5 in one basket under 34 to A and the 2 in the basket under 34 to B is, please see 34 to A. The party making the application establishes on the basis of the record of the arbitral tribunal. Therefore, for these 5 grounds, the party should be able to establish from the records of the arbitral tribunal. Mind you, prior to 30th August 2019, it was furnishes proof. Now, on and from 30th August 2019, it is establishes on the basis of record of the arbitral tribunal. And it gives these 5 grounds, mainly incapacity. I couldn't go before the arbitral tribunal. I was under some other incapacity. I didn't receive this, so on and so forth. Now come to 34.2b, please. 34.2b doesn't talk about the records of the arbitral tribunal. 34.2b says the court finds that. The court finds. Therefore, if you come under any one of the 5 pigeonholes under 34.2a, you should be able to demonstrate from the records of the arbitral tribunal. If you come under the 2 pigeonholes under 34.2b, it is not the records of the arbitral tribunal, but it is the court finds. You have to satisfy the court. And 2a, capital A, as I said, is patent illegality, a separate ground for it by itself. Please bear this in mind about these 8 pigeonholes. Now 34(2)(a) is basically incapacity and not getting proper notice. So that is the reason why it says arbitral tribunal records. If you look at the records, the court will be able to make out whether a party was given adequate time, whether he or she was really under some incapacity, so on and so forth. Under 2B, the most important point is public policy. 34(2)(b) and particularly 2, the arbitral award is in conflict with public policy of India. I'll quickly tell you, this public policy was not statutorily explained prior to 23/10/2015. On and from 23/10/2015, public policy now stands statutorily explained. Likewise, patent illegality also was added statutorily. It was earlier added by way of judicial decision saw pipes, now statutorily to capital A on and from 23/10/2015, and just see how it is circumscribed. The reason why I'm saying it is not an appeal, revision or a review, these are pigeonholes. Please see 2A. 2A is a classic example. 2 capital A. An arbitral award arising out of arbitrations other than international commercial arbitrations may also be set aside by the court if the court finds that the award is vitiated by patent illegality appearing on the face of the award. The proviso is very important. Provided that, 2 aspects of the proviso. An award shall not be set aside merely on the ground of an erroneous application of law or reappreciation of evidence. Therefore, even that patent illegality is so circumscribed that the scope under 34, that is why I said it's just challenge to the award under any one of these 8. You fit into it, you can get the award set aside. If you don't, you are out. Don't treat it as an appeal. That is the whole philosophy of the Act. It is not an appeal. Minimum judicial interference, finality of award, some of the pillars which I was mentioning about. Then while on 34, I mentioned 8 pigeonholes. And how would a court dealing with 34 deal with the application, which is a challenge to an arbitral award? I already mentioned that there is a 1-year time frame under subsection 6, and Supreme Court has reiterated that in Bhumi Vikas, though Bhumi Vikas is a broader authority for the broader proposition that subsection 5 is not mandatory and directory. More importantly, Supreme Court has said 34 is a summary procedure. This was in FISA Developers 2009, 17 SCC, page 796. FISA Developers. Subsequently, FISA Developers was reiterated by the Supreme Court in MK Global. In MK Global, that's reported in 2018, 9 SCC, page 49. 2018, 9 SCC 49. Supreme Court said the principle laid down in FISA Developers is a step in the right direction. In other words, FISA Developers principle was reiterated in MK Global. 34 is a summary procedure to be disposed of within 1 year and within these 8 pigeonholes, being neither an appeal nor a revision, but merely a challenge to the award. So once 34 is decided, there is an intra-court appeal available under 37, and thereafter, of course, the Article 136 is always available, but then it is very limited, and expeditious disposal is very, very important. This is all that I broadly wanted to tell you, because it is a broad overview. So I thought I was very, very topical, and I also gave the case laws so that whenever a youngster has any doubt on these aspects of the matter, pick up the case law, go through it thoroughly. They are very instructive and very elucidative. Therefore, we started with advising and going in for an arbitration agreement. What happens if the contract runs into rough weather? How the arbitral tribunal is constituted, either through the 11 route or directly. Once it is constituted, how does the arbitral tribunal function? And once the arbitral tribunal functions, not being bound by CPC, not being bound by Evidence Act, verdict is given. Once the verdict, which is an award, is given, what is the scope for challenging the award? How limited the scope is? And in the interregnum, 8 and 9. This is broadly arbitration. I think I have attempted to give it with all the clarity, the limited clarity at my command, with limited specificity at my command. I hope it is of some help. Thank you for the patience. And now, rather than questions, I would, considering that this is for youngsters and considering it is not esoteric, I would rather say time for doubts, if any, rather than saying time for questions. Yes, please.
Sriram sir?
I have three people who've specified certain doubts, so to say.
Yes.
The first one is from Jitesh, advocate. Can a loan agreement give power to a lender to appoint an arbitrator, and can such an arbitrator be appointed without reference to Section 11 proceedings?
Now you will have to look at Perkins and unilateral arbitration agreements. Look at TRF, Perkins, railway electrification, and I leave it at that.
Okay. But the next person is Rukmini, advocate. Incidentally, both are youngsters.
Yes.
She requires your opinion.
I stopped giving that 3.5 years ago.
With October 2016?
Yes.
Okay. Right. But in spite of that, she wants your opinion on a broad principle as to unsupervised, your opinion on unsupervised powers that have been given to arbitrators. Especially if the arbitrator says he will rule on an interim prayer only along with the award.
Yes.
What is her remedy? What is the remedy available?
Section 16 provides for that, and you can come to court, but the fundamental philosophy is you choose the arbitral tribunal. You decide to go in for ADR mechanism. The party autonomy is there. In spite of it, if you feel, therefore, it may not be, I think it would amount to begging the question to say so much powers have been given to the arbitral tribunal. It's a creature of the contract. Not only do you create it, the parties create it, you also decide on who the arbitrators are. That much of party autonomy is there. Nonetheless, if there are issues, please look at 16.5. There are also some judgments to that effect that in certain cases, you need not wait for the drill of final award and you can come in the interim.
Okay, thank you. And the last query that I have is from M. Sudhakar.
Or from Sudhakar?
Huh?
From you or from Sudhakar? You said you, I have.
No, the query I have is from Sudhakar.
Yes, please.
I'm just the mouthpiece.
Yes.
This query is in respect of a matter of procedure, in respect of marking of documents. His exact query is, if there is a document that is insufficiently stamped, would the arbitrator be empowered to refuse to market and as a consequence refer it to the district collector's stamps for proper valuation?
The arbitrator will certainly be entitled to refuse to market, but whether he can refer to the district collector's stamps for impounding, I have some doubts. He may have to say, you approach the court.
Yeah.
It's only tentative. I don't want to assert tentative. If I were asked to decide that this is what I might say, he's certainly entitled to say I will not market. But if he says so, I don't know whether he will be able to.
Okay.
Yes.
And a follow-up of that is, despite objections in respect of insufficient stamping, if a document is marked, what is the remedy pending the proceedings? Pending
You have to
the
wait for the award.
You'll have to wait for the award. Okay. Query from Sanjeev Kowal, who's from Delhi, I presume. The opposite party is in China. We invoked arbitration and got an award.
Isn't?
Is in China. Very topical as well. We invoked arbitration, got an award. Now, how can we file execution?
4749. I don't know. It should have been, if the opposite party is there, I think it should be 2&F. I don't know how it can be. My understanding is it should come under Part 2 and 4749.
Okay. And Advocate Satish Kumar,
Yes.
His query is, his doubt is, can we press for oral evidence being taken before the arbitrator?
Certainly, unless if you have not opted for 29B. 29B is the fast track procedure where even oral hearing is not there. Only on written submissions you can agree and finish it in 6 months. If you agree for fast tracking under 29B, then you may not be able to insist on oral evidence. Because if you just see let's see 29B for a minute. (29B), notwithstanding anything contained in this act, the parties to an arbitration agreement may, at any stage either before or at the time of appointment of the arbitral tribunal, agree in writing to have their dispute resolved by fast track procedure specified in subsection 3. I'm skipping 2. The arbitral tribunal shall follow the following procedure while conducting arbitration proceedings under subsection 1. A. The arbitral tribunal shall decide the dispute on the basis of written pleadings, documents, and submissions filed by the parties without any oral hearing. B. The arbitral tribunal shall have power to call for any further information or clarification from the parties in addition to the pleadings and documents filed by them. C. An oral hearing may be held only if all the parties make a request or if the arbitral tribunal considers it necessary to have oral hearing for clarifying certain issues. D. The arbitral tribunal may dispense with any technical formalities if an oral hearing is held and adopt such procedure as deemed appropriate for expeditious disposal of the case. This is about oral hearing itself. Therefore, that's only if both parties agree. Therefore, as long as you have not opted for 29B and as long as you have not opted for 6 months, under 29A, you are entitled to insist on oral evidence, but then it's the discretion of the arbitral tribunal. As long as you're under 29A.
Right. The next query is from Amog, advocate. His query is, respondent, a party does not appear in a section 11 proceedings, nor does he raise any objection to the appointment under section 11. Consequently, an arbitrator is appointed under section 11 after satisfaction being recorded of the existence of the agreement. Can the party still file an application under 16 challenging jurisdiction? That seems to be his question.
I think he can.
Yeah. In fact, he would be estopped. My thought process is he would be estopped if he had
No.
participated.
No, because of subsection 6 capital A, all that the court would have examined, confined its examination to existence of arbitration award. As I was mentioning, not even existence of valid arbitration agreement. Therefore, all that the court would have looked into is whether there's an arbitration agreement and an arbitrator would have been appointed. Unlike 8, it is not valid arbitration agreement. Therefore, I think it's quite open to a party who didn't appear in 11 to raise any objection under 16. I see
Okay.
I see no bar.
Okay. The next query is from.
And there's one moment. In fact, the Supreme Court went as far as saying you can just draw inspiration from this. In Lion Engineering, the Supreme Court said this is even if a party has not raised any preliminary issue under 16, it can be raised in 34.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That is Lion Engineering. I'll just try to give you Lion Engineering in a minute. Lion Engineering is 2018 SCC online SC 327. Interestingly, Lion Engineering is by 3-judge bench overruled paragraphs 16 and 17 of a 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court in MSP. The proposition is, and MSP citation is 2015 13 SCC 713. 2015 13 SCC 713. Paragraphs 16 and 17 of MSP was overruled in Lion Engineering. But that is for the proposition that a party which is not raised under 16 before the arbitral tribunal can still raise it before 34. In MSP, the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot. Lion Engineering said, no, you can. So I'm just drawing inspiration from that and saying, 11, yes. After all, in 11, what the court would have merely examined whether there is an arbitration agreement in the light of subsection 6 capital A, which we have seen. So why should the party not raise an issue under 16?
Fair enough. The next query is by L.S. Satyamurthy, district judge who's in the 13th additional city civil court in charge of CBI cases. His question is, Section 34 proceedings, according to what you have said as per the Supreme Court, is a summary proceeding.
Yes.
And the court cannot set aside the award merely on the ground that it is either erroneous application of the law or in pursuance of reappreciation of evidence.
That is only with regard to patent illegality ground.
Correct.
That's the proviso to 2 capital A, not to 34.
But his query is, as a consequence, can the court remand the matter to the arbitrator?
No. The only option is 34 subsection 4. Subsection 4 in sum and substance says if the court finds that the award is silent on certain aspects and the ground for setting aside the award can be removed by the tribunal, the court can send it back to the tribunal. Let's see 34.4 for a moment. On receipt of an application under subsection 1, the court may, where it is appropriate and it is so requested by a party, adjourn the proceedings for a period of time determined by it in order to give the arbitral tribunal an opportunity to resume the arbitral proceedings, or to take such other action as in the opinion of the arbitral tribunal will eliminate the grounds for setting aside the arbitral award. It's only subsection 4. You can adjourn the 34 proceedings by 3 months and say the tribunal can decide on these issues. There can't be a remand in an order in 34.
Okay. 1 minute, please. Advocate Siva Kollappan has this query, and he asks whether there is any provision to remove an arbitrator pending the arbitral proceedings,
Yes.
and does the arbitrator have any immunity against such removal?
No. It's very much available. (14).
Okay.
Failure or impossibility act, he becomes de jure or he withdraws office for controversy, all that. There is a provision, no immunity.
Okay. Prabhakaran Advocate from Chennai. Parties to the proceedings and cause of action at Chennai. Arbitrator is also at Chennai. Whether the proceedings can be held at Mumbai.
I didn't follow.
The entire cause of action arose at Chennai for the dispute. The parties are also at Chennai. The arbitrator is also at Chennai. Whether the proceedings can be held at Bombay.
If both of them agree, yes, venue.
Venue.
It's just venue.
Okay. The next
You
query
can even
is,
have it in Timbuktu.
yes.
Venue.
Whether the arbitral tribunal has the power to summon government records or officials as witnesses during an ongoing proceeding.
No. That is where second limb of subsection 3 of 9.
Okay.
Yes.
There are 2 other queries which are issue specific.
Yes.
So you would take the 5th on that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think that seems to be all. That seems to be the queries that can be asked and addressed within the parameters of doubts on first principles or fundamentals.
Yes.
The others seem to be rather issue specific.
Yes.
So this, of course, thank Justice Sundar for his time. This session, this entire series was aimed at young lawyers, and to be of some benefit to them was the sole purpose of this series. When we're talking about my personal take, when we're talking about a speaker who's going to try to convince young minds, we're talking about the ability to communicate and communicate well, knowledge on whatever is the topic for the discussion or the session, and the ability to be simple, which is why some of the finest legal minds have been lecturers. We're talking about the Madras High Court. But I think the difference with Justice Sundar is he seems to be following the finest traditions of the Bombay Bar. I do not know how many of you, including Justice Sundar, is aware that in the Bombay Bar, senior advocates till around 15, 20 years ago, senior advocates were taking almost weekly classes at the Government Law College, Bombay. And there used to be an occasional special lecture, maybe once a month, once in 2 weeks, by sitting judges of the Bombay High Court. You seem to be following that. I do not know why the law colleges here are not taking advantage of that. This ability to explain things clearly with reference not only to what needs to be done prior to an arbitration agreement coming into existence, but also what needs to be done till such time the arbitration agreement runs into rough weather and therefore results in benefit to us lawyers has been probably well explained in a very, very simple and clear manner. We're also seeing many messages thanking you for the very crisp presentation, and thank you very much, Justice Sundar. Thank you very much, and we're hoping to disturb you for many such webinars.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. As long as it was of some use, I'm happy, and I take leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.